Welcome here tonight at the Openbare Bibliotheek in Den Haag for a conversation with Ronelda Kamfer and Otten.
My glasses.
Your glasses.
When I have to read.
Quite important object in this to have with you. Well, let me use the time in which Christina fetches her glasses to tell a little bit about her. Als Casablanca, If Casablanca is one of her novels, In Wonderland, The Last Poet is one of her novels. She's working on a new novel now, of which she's going to read later on. Has been to South Africa for the Writers Unlimited.
And I started with the Taalunie, but that was completely different than with the Writers Unlimited 2 years later.
Two different experiences.
Oh, completely different. Because with the Taalunie, yeah, you know the Taalunie? Well, it's an organization for the Dutch language. We were only in white communities, in white universities, so that was really weird.
So the Taalunie was denying?
No, it was not denying. It was part of the deal, but I didn't realize it because it was my first visit, and I was just. They asked me like a month in advance, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Of course I want to go. I've never been to South Africa." And then suddenly I was in this really conservative.
But why did you choose to do that, Taalunie?
Well, because they visit university where they teach Dutch and Afrikaans. And but we also visited Poetry Africa or Writers yes, and that was a African festival, and that was really nice. But it was enlightening experience. And the second time with Writers Unlimited, which was called Winternachten at the time, that was one of the best things I've ever experienced in my writing career, to be honest, because I got a chance to work with your teacher and colleague, Ankie Koch.
A very famous South African poet.
Yeah.
And Ronelda Kamfer.
And we went to the Cape Flats then.
Two of her, it's going to be a multilingual experience this night, because these two are translations into Dutch of the poetry of Ronelda Kamfer. She's going to read later on from the in Afrikaans, and there's a beautiful Dutch translation made by Alfred Schaffer, a poet himself, living now in South Africa, but he also lived for a large part of his life in the Netherlands. And of course there is an English translation later on for the one person who is capable of understanding the other languages we're going to use. Two of her books have been translated into Dutch. Nu de slapende honden. Her first collection of poetry, and now Santekraam, which is translated quite recently. And you've been a writer in residence now for a few weeks now, I think?
Yeah, almost 2 months.
Almost 2 months, that's a little bit more than I expected. And you have been interviewed quite a lot these days about your poetry.
Yes, I have.
Do they keep asking the same things, or do they...
They do.
What are the recurring themes?
Just where I'm from, what the book's about, you know, the usual, because people are interested and they don't know me, and it's an introduction, so I'm very happy to answer all the questions.
And did you expect to have questions they didn't ask?
No.
No? No. Not at all?
I really didn't think about the questions. I was just happy to be able to get the residency, and I didn't really think about what it entailed until I got here and I saw my schedule and I realized, you know, this is hard work.
And that was part of the deal. Yeah. Maybe it's best to read from your poetry before we talk about it.
Okay.
Ja, is goed.
Na aan Klippenkust. Ja, Klippenkust se mense sien alles. Oom Grootvisvisser sit op sy stoep en staar voor hom uit. Soveel jare. Al wat hy doen is staar. Sy ma en pa is dood, al op Bredasdorp se rooi grond weg van die see begrawe. Sy pa het 'n bakker geword en sy ma het soos die ander kombuiswerk gaan doen. Sy ma was eintlik 'n kleremaker en sy pa met die tamai groot hande was 'n visser. Die kort trek, net om die draai trek, Die klipgooi-trek het mense se lewens vernietig. Iewers het iemand gaan sit en die besigheid bedink. Nie 'n mens nie, net 'n iemand wat nie een keer aan hom gedink het nie. Dit is wat 'n groot visvisser nie kan verstaan nie. Waar kom die haat vandaan? Wat het hulle aan daai iemand gedoen? Vir die mens wat nie 'n boek ken nie, vir 'n mens wat so na aan God se wonder bestaan, vir 'n mens wat lief is sonder rede, is grond alles. Om groot visvisser sug en staar oor die diep blou hemelwater uit. Hy dink aan sy ou vader se mense met die Indiese bloed. Hulle is ook net weggevat van hulle grond. Hy wonder of dit sy bloed se skuld is. Sy bloed wat maak dat sy voorgangers en hy elke keer weg moet.
Dicht bij Klippenkust. Ja, de mensen van Klippenkust zien alles. Ome Grote Visser zit op zijn veranda en staart voor zich uit, zoveel jaren. Al wat hij doet is staren. Zijn moeder en vader zijn al dood en begraven in de grond van Bredaasdorp. Ver weg van zee, zijn vader werd bakker en zijn moeder is net als de andere werkster geworden. Zijn moeder was eigenlijk naaister en zijn vader, met die enorme handen van hem, was een visser. Die verhuizing van niks, die hier om de hoek verhuizing, heeft mensenlevens vernietigd. Ergens is iemand gaan zitten en dat hele gedoe gaan bedenken. Geen mens, maar iemand die niet één keer aan hem gedacht heeft. Dat is wat ome Grote Visser niet kan begrijpen. Waar komt die haat vandaan? Wat hebben ze die persoon misdaan? Voor een man die geen boeken leest, een man die zo dicht bij Gods wonderen leeft, voor een man die lief heeft zonder reden, is land alles. Ome Grote Visser zucht en staart over het diepblauwe hemelwater. Hij denkt aan zijn voorouders met hun Indiase bloed. Zij zijn ook zomaar van hun land weggehaald. Hij vraagt zich af of het de schuld is van zijn bloed. Zijn bloed dat maakt dat zijn voorgangers en hij elke keer weg moeten.
These are the stories of a very small fishing community, Skipskop. A lot of people not able to tell their stories. A lot of stories around in these communities. At what point did you think I want to tell these stories?
I think when I was very young, I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a big storyteller, and I grew up listening to him, and I couldn't understand why he didn't write, why his stories weren't in books. And obviously when I grew older, I realized that because he was illiterate, he couldn't write it down, and that made me firstly angry because he wasn't illiterate because he didn't want to learn, but it was because of the political system in our country. But on the other hand, it also inspired me to want to write these stories down.
So your grandfather sparked it all,
Yeah.
you could say.
Yeah.
There's something wrong
Yeah,
with
there's
the
something
microphone.
wrong with the sound, I think.
With her microphone.
No, this microphone's good, but you have to talk a lot louder.
Okay.
Closer to the microphone. Okay, well.
Just yell.
Yeah.
But it's, because it's not only the voices of your family we hear, but it's a lot of voices we hear. But does it almost give you the moral obligation to do something with all these stories when so many people can't read and can only tell the stories orally but can't write them down? It's
I don't see it as a moral obligation. I want to. It's what I want to do. It's the kind of stories I want to write. So it's not I'm not making some decision that I don't have any choice in it. It's the kind of things that I like reading, and it's the kind of things I want to write about.
But in a sense, it's also you're saving these stories from being forgotten or being a part of a smaller community than it is now.
Yeah.
People in Holland are reading these stories now.
Yeah, and hopefully that inspires someone. It inspires people to go back to their own sort of communities and capture the stories and write it down. Yeah. Just because history was very unfair, and there's a great loss. So we lost a lot of good things, and along with all the horrible things that happened. But by preserving the stories and telling it in a way that's not sort of one-dimensional, but allows for anyone to be able to connect with it and to relate. I think that's a good thing.
Despite all the losses, there's still something to save.
Yeah.
So in a sense it is, maybe not an obligation, but surely something that...
Yeah, obviously, but I prefer to write about things that I am sort of an authority on. I can reference personal things, and so that it's more authentic, I think, than so I can stand in the story and realize that this is the truth that I'm saying. Well,
you think you can only write the stories that are of people very near to you? Is it a context thing?
Again, it's what I prefer doing. So it's all about choosing what I like and what's the easiest for me to do, and what I feel comfortable with. So yeah, if I wanted to, I could probably write about things outside of myself. I mean nothing about. I mean many writers do that, but it's a choice, personal preference.
Because it doesn't work that way, the other way around. I interviewed you last Saturday and I asked you, is it possible to fully understand your poetry without, outside of the South African context? Which of course I am outside of that context. You said no, it's a universal, it's everywhere in the world people experience
losses and things like that. So it's the emotions in the stories are universal. So hopefully people don't read just see the words and the places, and if it's not familiar they don't relate, but hopefully they read deeper into it and realize that anyone can make a connection with anyone all over the world. Most of our stories have some sort of similarity. Whatever way that they could force the people who live there and relocate them somewhere else where they thought fit. So it's people who were self-sufficient and working and having roots there, and they just kind of, the government come in and say, okay, this is the land we need now, everyone move out, we're building your houses in some other town and now it's time for you to move. So forced removals happened all over South Africa, and many of the stories are never, no one really talks about it because it happened so long ago, and this was just my way of basically paying tribute to my grandfather and his story.
And there's so much damage in all kinds of ways, and so much loss in all these stories. It's it goes on endlessly almost. Do you think you can? Well, you can't, of course. You can't do anything about the loss and anything about all the suffering, but. Is there something positive that can come out of writing the poetry you write?
I think the positivity is remembering, that people's lives weren't for nothing. People's lives weren't for nothing, I think my biggest years. And after he retired, the farm owner said that, you're useless to me basically now, so you have to leave. And he didn't have anything. He didn't have a house. He didn't have, he had nothing. He had no pension or anything. And he moved to Cape Town to live in a room with one of his children. And, he shared, this grandfather figure was this, hero to all of us, and he had to share a room with one of my cousins. And he died within a year of leaving that, and I realized that how he must have felt that this whole entire life, and he had nothing to show for it. And by writing, I think that there's something to show for it.
The first time I read some of your poems was because of Christine Otten, who was reading some of your poetry through a group, and I attended quite.
Oh yeah.
By coincidence, that's how I. When did you got to know the poetry of Ronelda?
I think a year and a half ago, when a friend said you should read her, and I did, because I trust her. Your heart, and it's especially what Ronelda says. It's the South African reality transformed into poetry, but it's a reality that is. That at least I, and I think a lot of the audience in not only Holland but in the world can relate to, because it's deeply human. The sense of loss, of pain, of self-hate, of abuse. It also happens here. And the way you write about it is really, there's no escape from it. It's just there, and that's yeah. It hits me and it inspires me. That's what I can say.
And how does she do that? You think?
I think if I may speak for you, because I don't know. Well, I know you a little bit now, but I think she's just really honest. And I think that is one of the virtues a writer must have, to be really truthful to oneself, because that's the only thing you got. And I think I write different books and I write prose, but I have the same kind of intention. I'm not a really like this intellectual writer that starts with the big world, and then I always start from stories and from images and from people and experiences and smells and I think Ronelda does that too, and she writes it down very well, almost very straightforward. And when I'm stuck with my writing, I always tell myself, just write it down. And I tell students too, just write what you want to say, and that helps if you start like from the ground. And I think that is maybe I'm not right, but I think you do.
Is she right?
Yeah, definitely.
But some of the poetry might get lost when you just write down what you want to write down.
No, but you forget one thing. You have to have the talent. You have to have the sense of literary feeling and knowing what you have to do, and that is a given. And I think, like you as a teenager, you read a lot of Dylan Thomas, which I did coincidentally too, and I love him too. And you listen to music, and Ankie Krog you read, so. That shapes your style, and of course, if you're not a poet, you can't do that. You can just not, like people say, oh, I can write a book. That's not it. But it's the honesty, to be really truthful and not hide behind things. I think that is the secret, and not be ashamed, because it's painful what you do. And I know when it's painful to write, it's usually worthwhile writing, because then you hit something. Then you hit something that is you rather don't talk about. The things we don't talk about, we find difficult to talk about. It's easier to read about, because then we recognize oneself in another person. You want to share. That's why we write. You want to connect with other peoples, and not superficially, but in the soul. So you have to be really honest.
Did you feel that? Did you feel anger, for example?
Yeah, I always feel anger. I think that's. I think I was born angry.
That's a good quote. I think I was born angry.
It's just. I think that, luckily for me, I grew up with being very sensitive to words. I think in the community I grew up in my family, people would get drunk and fight, and it would be fine the next day with each other, but people would be angry for years with each other if someone said the wrong thing. So I grew up with a great sensitivity for words, and knowing how valuable they are. So for me it is, when I write, I know what my mother used to say, ken die waarde van jou woorde, en woorde dra krag. So that's what I think about mostly when I write, is to be careful, firstly, and be sensitive to whoever sort of story whose life I'm writing about. So it's just knowing that words are powerful, and to be respectful to the craft and the art of it, and just sort of write what's needed, and leave everything else out of it.
Do you still feel anger when you write them?
Yeah, but I think my anger is more, I think everything can be controlled if you focus on what you want to do. So anger and happiness and anger, they come and go. So it's part of who you are, but it's not the fuel of what I write. It shouldn't be. I think that I can wake up in the morning and play with Seymour and then go sit down and write like the worst, horrible, most darkest things, because I know how to separate myself from the words.
But you keep all these horrible experiences within the boundaries of your poetry, so you don't have to live with it outside of poetry.
I don't really see it as sort of horrible. These things I'm right. If someone especially from Europe, they read this for the first time and think it's horrible. But for us, living our lives, it's just the reality. It's just normal for us, these things. So if I go out somewhere in Cape Town and I meet someone and they tell me something that might sound horrible to Christine, and for me it's like, oh yeah, that also happened to me, and then we'll go on with our lives. So we don't really stop and think about things as much. So I think that's why it's defined as being, all these horrible things you write about. And for us, it's just our lives.
That's because we read your poetry from our perspective, from our perspective in a relatively safe world without the history you have to carry around with you.
Yeah.
But still, we can relate to all these stories.
Yeah, I hope you can relate, and I think that just not trying to put yourself in anyone else's shoes, just kind of stick to what you know, but be aware of things more, and be aware that your reality is not all there is. It's very different in the rest of the world.
Why were you so early on convinced of the value of words and what words could do, and what you could do with words?
I think, as I explained, because it's the examples I saw in my family, in my community. Just you don't say certain things to people because that will destroy them. You can go out and fight, and that's fine. But so I learned to use them to, in my way, to not be loose with it, just to be very sort of protective of words and things like that.
So there's a large emphasis on the use of words and the right use of words. You can fight them outside, but maybe it can be more deadly when you say something to them.
Once you say something, you can't really take it back. It's out there. So, I think that's just the environment I grew up in. So that's what it taught me. That's the main influence in my poetry. That's why I write the way I write.
But does it also mean there's a part you can't write about?
No, I can. Yeah, there's no sort of taboo. I can write about anything if I feel it's needed to, if I need to, if I have to.
No, because you said there's some things you can't say to somebody. Some things when you say them, they can be more deadly than fighting with someone on the street.
Yeah,
it means
I said that to explain how sensitive it is.
Yeah.
So how much I understand how powerful words can be. So even as a child, I knew how powerful they were, because I grew up seeing this and realizing this, that you can't say things to people and expect it to be okay, and the adults around me, that's how I grew up, so that's the world I lived in.
So, but then it's a big change, because you're very open. You write about almost anything, like your mother that not loves you enough, your father that abuses your mother. Is that how did your parents find that, or is it in a way good that you did it also for them?
I think I write about things that I write about things in an open and honest way, in the hope that someone reads it, that it can be helpful to someone if they read it and they realize that their story isn't so unique, or it's not the end of the world for them. There are many people who feel the same and who've been through the same experiences.
But have you ever felt the shame, Christine talked about earlier? Shame to write?
No.
You don't
I
seem
think
to,
when no.
to be ashamed.
No, I'm not ashamed. I think I set out when I started to write, I decided that if I can write about one thing, I should be able to write about everything. If if I'm going to write about politics, I should write about personal things also. And there's no need to. If I call myself a poet and an honest poet, then I should be an honest poet, not just saying it.
Once you've made that choice, you can't go back. You can't withhold some things.
I think if you are a serious writer, you can't. If you let shame get in the way, you can't be a good writer. I think because.
But don't you feel shame?
Sure. Not shame. No, I don't feel shame. That's the same thing. But I do.
Write about anything that happened to you, for example, without restriction.
No, not without restriction, but because it's a choice. What do I write, and what do I write about, and what do I not write about? But the painful things seems to be the most important things sometimes. The book I'm writing now about my family and about is filled with quite some painful things. What do I want to say? So it's difficult because a novel is also different than poetry. It's but I think you have to be honest with. But I think. And you can be honest, even towards the people you love, if you write about painful things, as long as you are sincere. And that only you can be the limit. I can only be the judge of that. Try to be as honest as I can be. When I wrote The Last Poets, which is about a group of black poets in America, it's all the most intimate sleazy details of their love lives, of their violence. Everything is in there, but it's done with love, and they love me for that, because it's just how we are. This is how it is to be human, and this is how you can connect. And if you don't want to be honest about that, then you're not. What are you worth then?
But these people chose to talk to you and knew what the consequences were of you writing about them. When you write about your own family history, not everybody in that family probably said to you, you can write anything you want.
No, and I am careful.
There must be restrictions.
Of course, I don't write about my brother, for example, because he doesn't want me to write about him, and I respect that. But
so in honesty, there's also something else. There's other people involved.
Sure, and like I don't write about my children because I don't. They grow up. I don't do that. And not in a way but I write about my father, and while he's alive, and I wanted him to be alive to read it, because it's in a way he didn't live. He didn't have a real life because he was always afraid of living, and he was like very young age in mental hospitals and all that, and so and he wanted to be a writer, but he came from a very, very poor background and couldn't be a writer, but instead he went mad. So in a way, to write this book is also to pay tribute to it. And the funny thing is, and that is what I noticed while doing it, was that in the process of writing, something changes with experiences, like things that were very painful in the past. When you can transform it into literature, somehow, in a way, it becomes a little bit less painful. Yeah, because it is.
Is that true for you, Ronelda? It becomes less painful once you've written it down.
I think once I've written it down, it becomes sometimes for me more painful, because then it's out there and I have to look at it and I have to read it and I see it. And when it's inside, you can decide whether or not you want to think about things. So
the poem keeps on confronting you.
But I don't mean that writing down is less painful. It's like in the changing the process, you can. Because you also research what happened, so you understand things, like you understand why things happen, and that is something of a comfort, and that changes. It does something with the experience. Like it's like living. Like when you're older, you can look differently to your parents.
But that's more that you derive insight in a certain situation from the process of writing about it, instead of making the emotion you felt or feel make you experience that emotion differently.
I don't understand the question. Sorry.
What is it? There's a certain amount of insight you gain from writing about it. Suddenly you understand things you didn't understand when you didn't write about
well, maybe in the case of my father it's different because we communicate through literature in a bit. Because I hadn't seen him in years because it was too painful. And then I started seeing him again, like when he was 80. And I started sending him novels by Philip Roth, because I've always found Philip Roth's voice so similar to my father. He's the same generation. So we were talking about books. My father is very intelligent and still lives in a mental institution, but very intelligent man. So this is how we communicate. And in a way, I do what he wanted to do. So in a way, it is in a way of paying tribute to him. So, and he is so, every time he calls me, he said, "How is your book?" He's excited about it, and he asked me, "Is it painful?" It must be painful, he says. And then actually I use that in the book at some point, and say, well, when I write it down, it becomes something new. It becomes a book. So it adds something to it. It's not. Like Adriaan van Dis said, anything is bearable, and as long as you can put it in a story. This is what we do. We tell stories to make things bearable, and we do that. Everybody does that. We tell our stories. We make stories from all the painful things, I think, like your grandfather, he was the biggest storyteller there is. He was an illiterate man, but
But everything bearable?
That was Adriaan van Dis who said that, but well, it helps. It certainly helps. For me, it definitely helps. I always have a second life. I experience, like I always have a life I can retreat in, like, and I use everything in life for my work, and that's my work. It's great. So that's a comfort. But
Ronelda just said it can be more painful once you've written about it. It's not just the emotion in your head, but it's also a poem.
Yeah.
You keep on reading, and when you read it, it does something to you. So.
Yeah, but it's for me it's also highly satisfying to have done something with it, to make it useful or anything, or to make it into something beautiful, or something that people can relate to, that it's not been for nothing, that I can communicate to other people. That is that is
to make sense of it.
Yeah, that is what. Well, like your poetry has been like the greatest gift. I didn't know you before that, and it was like I knew you, and actually you was not much different than I pictured you were. So I think it gives an insight in someone's soul. When we talk to each other, it's difficult, but when you read someone's deepest things, you can get an insight, and that makes us less lonely, because we can really communicate.
Poetry can't possibly be more personal than this, I believe. Or is that?
I don't know. I hope it's
Maybe we should read a few poems from the first book.
That's a good idea.
Waar ik sta. Nou sit ek om 'n tafel met my voorvaders se vyande. Ek knik en groet bedagsaam, maar eers diep binne my weet ek waar ek staan. My hart en kop is oop en soos goed opgevoede mense lag en eet ons saam, maar eers diep binne my weet ek waar ek staan.
Nu zit ik aan tafel met de vijanden van mijn voorvaderen. Ik knik en groet beleefd, maar ergens diep van binnen weet ik waar ik sta. Mijn hart en hoofd staan open en zoals wel opgevoede mensen lachen en eten we samen, maar ergens diep van binnen weet ik waar ik sta.
Een gewone blauwe maandagoggend. Dit was 'n gewone blauwe maandagoggend. Erens het 'n ma kind se lyk gaan uitken. Ek het my gewas, tande geborsel en my bibliotheek afgehandel. Op die yskas was 'n briefie van my ma wat vra dat ek tog nie die biryani so sterk moet maak vanaand nie. My sussie het haar sokkies gesoek en by 7:30 het ek die voordeur gesluit en die sleutel op die ou plek gaan wegsteek. By die huiswinkel het ek 2 losse sigarette gekoop en in my sokkie weggesteek. Op die hoek van Wildflower en Roustraat het 'n meisie saam met haar toekomstige modenaars gejog. In my kop het Dylan Thomas geskree. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. In die voorligtingklas het my hoogswanger beste vriendin begin bloei. Buite in die straat was daar 'n paar gunshots. By eerste pauze was daar 'n lijk in skoolstraat, 'n miskraam in my klas, 'n uitstel op die bibliotheek en 'n vrou wat gillend in die straat te hardloop en vir die Here vra: "Waar was Josef toe Jesus gekruisig is?"
Het was een gewone blauwe maandagochtend. Ergens moest een moeder het lijk van haar kind identificeren. Ik waste me, poetste mijn tanden en maakte mijn opdracht voor biologie af. Op de koelkast zat een briefje van mijn moeder, die vroeg of ik de biryani alsjeblieft niet zo pittig wilde maken vanavond. Mijn zusje zocht haar kousen en tegen 7:30 deed ik de voordeur achter me dicht en verstopte de sleutel op de vaste plek. In het buurtwinkeltje kocht ik 2 losse sigaretten en stopte die in mijn kous. Op de hoek van Wildflower en de Roosstraat stond een meisje grapjes te maken met haar toekomstige moordenaars. In mijn hoofd schreeuwde Dylan Thomas: "Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." Tijdens de voorlichtingsles begon mijn hoogzwangere beste vriendin te bloeden. Buiten op straat klonken enkele pistoolschoten. Tegen de eerste pauze was er een lijk in de Schoolstraat, een miskraam in mijn klas, uitstel voor de biologieopdracht en een vrouw die gillend door de straat rende en God vroeg: "Waar was Jozef toen Jezus werd gekruisigd?" Shall we maybe we should read the English translation for you. If there is.
There is an English translation.
You can do that.
Read English? No.
Okay.
Should I read?
Yeah, no. Which one do you want to read? Nach.
So there's the English.
Okay. Oh yeah.
You're going to read the English.
You first.
Nacht. Mag die nacht jou goed behandel. Mag die donker vir jou mooi wees. Mag stilte vir jou vrede beteken. En mag die nachtgeleide jou aan die slaap sis. Mag jy drome droom en nie net slaap nie.
Good night. May the darkness treat you well. May silence mean peace. May the sounds and the shadows in the dark send you off into a heavenly sleep. And may you dream dreams and never just sleep. Yeah, new one. If you, that's what you're here for, the poetry.
Klein Kado. Kado was gebore, maar niemand het hom verwag nie. Sy ma was 16 en sy pa gemeenskapsbouer van die jaar. Sy ouma was 'n cashier en sy stiefoupa het gedrink vir die pyn. Kado was 'n mooi klomp met 'n donker vel en ligte oë, mooi genoeg om Engels te praat. Hy het gehou van 3 stokkies en vrotte eier in die pad speel. Die gawe van die mobile het gesê, Kado was 'n engelkind. Die aand voor Kado se eerste dag op grootskool het die schoolboys klappers in die pad geskiet. Kado het by die venster uitgeloer. Die koel het in sy keel gaan sit. Sy ma het gehuil nie, die politicians het 'n boompie geplant en die Kaapse dokter het hom uitgepluk en gegooi waar die res van die Kaapse drome lê, op die vlaktes.
Cardo was born but not expected. His mother was 16 and his father community builder of the year. His grandmother was a cashier and his step-grandfather drank to ease the pain. Cardo was a beautiful child with dark skin and light eyes, beautiful enough to speak English. He liked playing drie stokkies and vrotte eier in the streets. Titi Gawa from the mobile said that Cardo was heaven sent. On the eve of Cardo's first day at school, the schoolboys were playing with crackers in the street. Cardo looked on through the window. The bullet was lodged inside his throat. His mother didn't cry. The politicians came and planted a tree. The Cape doctor uprooted it and blew it where the rest of Cape Town of Cape Town's dreams lay on the Cape Flats. I'm sorry for that last sentence. Is it? For now, okay.
Okay. Maybe later on.
I'm
some
sorry
more,
for
some more
the
poetry.
for the last. It's the first time I see them in English.
Maybe we could talk about the language you use, at Afrikaans, which you also give something to that language that didn't exist in that language, at least till very recently didn't exist in that language. That must be of some importance to you as well.
Yeah, I think that when I started to write, I think when I was a teenager, you know, being rebellious, you think that the first thing that I thought I was going to do was reject my language. And what I realized is that the stories, the kind of poetry that I wanted to write should be written in Afrikaans. And I think that I got over the hang-up of Afrikaans very faster than most people. And I realized that this is who I was, and not to, that's why I said I don't have shame, not to be ashamed of anything. And if I was going to be unashamed about who I was, then Afrikaans was the language that I was supposed to write in. And it's just kind of staying true to the identity of the poetry and the people.
Because it's the language they live in, so you have to write about them in that language.
Yeah.
But it must also mean something to do that in that language. It's also.
And yeah, I think that for me it's more to write. I always say to people to say to who do you write to. I'd say I write so that my sister, who likes Twilight and, you know, the Kardashians, I read so she can understand, and I read so that you know, a professor at some university can understand. And I write in the language, I make it accessible so that no one feels alienated by it. I think that Afrikaans has a very negative, you know, it carries a lot of baggage, and if you alienate people by writing in a way that's not sort of toegankelijk for them, yeah, then that's why, you know, you have people in crisis thinking that this language is going to die. But if you write in a way that everyone is included and they feel that the way they speak can also be poetic, so it's also important, and it's also recognized, and it's not lower class or whatever or unintelligent. It's the language, and it's beautiful, and it can be poetry.
Everybody has to be able to understand what you write, despite their
Yeah, because I write
class
about
or
normal people. I write about average people. It's no use if I write about them and, you know, they don't understand it. So it's important for me to write in, yeah, the way I write.
And in it Afrikaans.
And in Afrikaans.
It's also a very beautiful language. I don't understand it fully, but it's just to listen to it. It's a very beautiful language.
Afrikaans is the language. It's your language. It's the language of the colored people.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you usually, yeah, you write best in your mother tongue.
Yeah.
And,
But it's also a language with a large history, and a very unpleasant history for a large part.
Yeah, it was, you know, used in a very sort of horrible way. But I think that now it is just a language. I think it's part of the 11 official languages, and now it's treated and seen as just a language. It's, you know, that's how you speak. That's how you communicate. It's not so. Yeah, it's not the weapon of whatever of the oppressor.
You talked about your new book, Christina, earlier on. Maybe it's a good idea that you read something from your book.
it's cool. Okay, I read one short scene, and maybe later on.
Later on,
yeah, it's something else. It's just a short scene, and I stole the first sentence from you. Not stealing, but just get inspired. And it's quite strange to read from a book that you're working on. So I usually don't do that. So, but I thought, don't be shy, don't be ashamed, just do it. Okay. I only have it in Dutch. So I'm sorry. It's very short. Het was een doordeweekse blauw-grijze namiddag. Dat is de zin. Ik was net thuis uit school. Op de eettafel lag een briefje van mijn moeder dat ze bij mijn opa was om schoon te maken en of ik de hond wilde uitlaten. Ik vloekte. Ik zette water op voor thee. De herder Misha lag te slapen in zijn mand. Het leek of hij droomde, want hij piepte af en toe en dan trilden zijn achterpoten. Ik was een jaar of 14. Ik hoorde niet dat de achterdeur openging. Dag Christine. Het klonk als de stem van een geest. Met een ruk draaide ik me om en zag mijn vader staan in de deuropening, tussen de keuken en de schuur, in een kort zwart leren jasje. Hoe gaat het? Vroeg hij, alsof het heel gewoon was. Maar hij hoorde je helemaal niet te zijn. Hij woonde in Apeldoorn, zoals we de psychiatrische inrichting kortweg noemden. Ik zei niks, had het idee dat hij ieder ogenblik voor mijn ogen zou oplossen, een wit stofwolkje achterlatend hooguit. Maar hij keek me strak aan en zei, ik hou het daar niet meer uit, ik kom weer thuis. Als in een reflex deinsde ik achteruit. Nee. Hoezo nee? Hij keek oprecht verbaasd. En ik dacht eraan dat ik de hond moest uitlaten. Ooit had mijn vader me op een zondagochtend heel vroeg wakker gemaakt, omdat mijn moeder, die doorgaans met Misha wandelde, migraine had. En ik begreep toch wel dat hij te ziek was om... Je kunt niet thuiskomen, zei ik. En het was alsof iemand anders het zei. Daar ga jij over? Met één been stapte hij de keuken in. Mama is er niet. Ik hou het daar niet meer uit, zei hij nog een keer, tussen al die gestoorden. Dat begreep ik. Maar hier kon hij ook niet zijn. Die gedachte was als een brok steen binnenin me. Een onwrikbare zekerheid die me veel groter maakte dan ik was. Een reus en mijn vader kromp terwijl ik naar hem keek. De donkere, smekende blik in zijn ogen maakte me misselijk en draaierig. Probeer er maar eens in te komen, waag het eens. Het water kookte. De hoge piep deed zeer aan mijn oren. Misha werd er wakker van en kwam met een kwispelende staart naar me toe en drukte zijn vochtige neus tegen mijn benen. Hij gromde in de richting van mijn vader, die nu zo groot was als een kabouter. Ik aaide het dier over zijn kop. Met de andere hand draaide ik het gas onder het kokende water uit. Je kunt hier niet zijn, zei ik, om de verpletterende stilte voor te zijn. Hij schraapte zijn keel, trok zijn been terug en stond nu voor de drempel in de schuur. Zijn schouders en armen hingen verslagen in het zwarte jasje. Daar ga ik maar weer, zei hij. Ja, zei ik. En toen draaide hij zich om en liep de schuur uit, naar buiten. Achter hem hoorde ik de deur met een plof in het slot vallen.
Thank you, Christine. You're going to read the second part of the book later on. Maybe it's very short. Maybe you can tell us very short what's the story of the book.
Well, it's a story that starts with, it's written partly from the perspective of my father, who is now 83, and partly from my perspective. But then I read the parts of him, it's just really fictionalized because I can't feel know how my father feels. But it starts when we meet again, when he's 80. And I suddenly see that he's an old man and he can't no longer harm me. So I'm not afraid of him anymore because it was fear that kept me from it. And so we start connecting again. That's the beginning. It's a very positive book, I think. You shouldn't say that when you read this part, but it is because the book is about that, trying to get together again. And then I start talking to my family and to his brother and all that, and so I find out about the stories of my family background, and I come from a very kind of a strange background because it's very radical families. All hundreds of years ago, they were all communist and anarchist, but my father is from a really, really poor family. So he was very intelligent, and that was really difficult because there was no money to get him to college, and he was ashamed of his own parents. And he was very left-wing, outspoken, intelligent, but he was also very deeply afraid of everything because that was his illness. So that he got all crazy of that. But and then there was my mother's family who were also working class, but they were playing. They were very much into art and culture. It was the time of the verheffing, which we call the socialists. They thought, well, if you play theater and education, and you can get. So that
have to
was,
educate the
yes,
working
and that's where my
classes in order
parents
to-
meet.
to
Well,
get them
they
ahead in
rehearsed
that.
A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams, and that's where the book starts, when they meet in the 50s. And when they play, they are Stanley and Blanche, and they feel they can have the world, they can be different people, they can be actors. And Rutger Hauer's parents, they taught my parents. So they were quite good, amateur but good. So they had everything going for them, but everything, it didn't work out. And so that is what I'm researching in the book. And through talking and it's not a reconstruction, because I found out that doesn't work. That did work with the last poets, but it's too close to reconstruct. But you can't talk about it and think about it, and well, sometimes I reconstruct. So, but that's mainly it. And it's also about writing and about me, about myself, how to survive a crazy father.
That's difficult for a large part of us, I think.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel jealous? Because this is one poem can be very exact, very concise, can say everything you want to say, and you have to do a lot of work to write
Yes.
a book like this, and a lot of emotional work, I guess, probably as well.
Yeah, but I think that's the same with writing poetry.
Are you ever jealous of writing in such a concise way, in such a?
No, not jealous. No, because why should I be jealous if you can write a novel of it?
Well, that's maybe not the right word, maybe jealousy, but it's.
Yeah, no, I'm not jealous. I'm just, I find it inspiring, and I love it. And sometimes I write poetry too. I do that too. But I'm a novelist. You know, I think it's like I like to sit down and work for hours and rewrite, and I love that. I love the rhythm of that. Like like prose has its own rhythm and own music, and I like that too. Like I love poetry, but it's a different
a novelist.
craft.
You turned out to be a novelist.
Yeah, and yeah.
Was there a moment you had to choose which form you would choose to write in? Poetry or fiction or prose or?
No, I think from the beginning I decided that poetry, I could write poetry, and I'm only now starting to write, prose and longer pieces, because, when I started out I just thought it was too long and too much work and too much effort, and I was just sort of too lazy to write to be a novelist. Poetry was just easier, and I could say what I felt in shorter.
And now you're discovering prose as a...
Yeah, now I feel I have
That's
to.
great.
What kind of
exploring
prose?
Short stories. I'm writing. My husband is a comic artist and an illustrator, so I'm writing a story for him to illustrate. So, yeah.
How old were you when you wrote your first poem?
I don't
You still remember?
No.
Don't?
I think that I started out. A friend of mine was at university. I was finished with high school already, and he said there was a competition on his campus for poets, and he knew I enjoyed writing, and he said I should write poems for him, and he'll enter me. And I wrote the poems, but I decided then no, I'm not going to give it to you, and just forget about it. And he actually stole the poems and entered me in anyway, and that's how it basically all started. Getting collected. My poems were chosen to be in this anthology that Anki was involved with, and Alfred Schaffer, he was also involved with that, and that's how it all started for me. So I didn't really write many years and decide, okay, this is what I wanted to do. It just happened, and I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll write.
So it could have turned out completely different when he didn't.
Yeah.
Suppose he didn't steal the poems you wrote.
Yeah, but I think I would have found poetry eventually. I think he just made it a lot easier for me.
And after that, after people liked the poetry you wrote, were you immediately confident of what you wrote?
No, not at all. I think that even after finishing the first book and being published, I wasn't really confident in it, because it was not what poetry sounded like in Afrikaans. It was completely different, and I had no one to sort of reference and say, well, this is my inspiration, and I write, you know, I aspire to be like whatever writer. So I was completely sort of left alone, but now I feel it's the confidence is there. I think that the more I realize why I write and who I write about, I think about that more than anything else.
And the strange thing is that exactly that aspect of your poetry was, of course, what a lot of people immediately liked. That it wasn't relating to anything that existed before you wrote these poems.
I think it does have similarity with the work of Ankie Krog and Ingrid Jonker, because it's the same honesty, that same ruthless honesty, I think. But it's, in a way, it can be like, as a teenager, I was really stubborn and rebellious, and I just refused to read Shakespeare just because my teacher said it was good, and I just refused to read the classics, and this was stupid. But in a way, it is also free, because when you start almost like very free, and then later you read the classics, and of course you need that, but also you don't need to study that, like in university what they do. When I see in the university, it's the worst school for a writer. Because it's like the other way around. You study things, and then, like when it has to come from another place. But that's another subject.
You can't really train anyone to be a writer.
No. And like you said, the jealousy. I used to be jealous at musicians, because for a long time I was jealous at musicians, because you have one song and wow, you're crying. That's it, one note and you're crying and you want to touch people. That's what we want. But then that changed when I wrote the last poets book, because I thought at that moment for me I could write in a musical way. I could like do anything. I had this feeling from, you just listen. It was actually listening to John Coltrane's Love Supreme, and I thought, oh, my book has to be like that, like a jazz book. And I think I read that in your poetry too, especially the second one. That is really free. It's almost like music, it's like air. And I think that's the way I write too. Maybe you can't judge on this short piece, but because I use different forms in my writing, but to use almost like a painter, like you use colors and landscape and smells, and then you write. So, but it is very technical about writing, but
music plays a part, of course, in your poetry, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that I'm mostly influenced by music. Whatever, when I decide to write a book, I usually pick an album and I listen to that over and over again while I'm writing it. And it's a bit superstitious, I don't know, but it's just how I get inspired. I very rarely read a book and then I'm inspired to write. It's usually an album that inspires me. If I listen to music, I get inspired to write.
And does that album get into your poetry, or is it just?
Yeah, it's usually just to keep me disciplined and keep me focused. So and it's. Yeah, I think really fast and I write really fast. So by putting music to it, and it sort of calms me down and gets me focused.
It becomes the soundtrack of the poetry you write.
Yeah, that's what I'm jealous of. I write slowly.
But when you read that same poetry you wrote in that period, is the music still attached to it in your mind?
For me, it is.
It still is.
It is. Yeah, I think when I wrote the first book, I just listened to. It's about me, my years growing up, and the main album I listened to was Urban Hymns by The Verb, and still today I refer to it when I speak to my husband. I refer to it as my Urban Hymns, and Santagram is my Neon Bible by Arcade Fire. So we refer to our books as our albums, the one that we listen to.
What kind of albums are they?
Mostly rock music, so it's usually very popular music, but it's not sort of anything obscure that no one's ever heard of.
No, I mean, if you refer to your poetry as the collections of poetry as albums, what kind of albums are they? Is it a concept album, or is it?
Well, this one's a concept album. That one was just the first one is just
And what kind of genre would we
rock and roll.
would be attached to it? Rock and roll?
Rock and roll. Yeah, this is more, I don't know.
For
It's
you.
almost classical music, I think. Something.
Is it in what sense?
I would compare it with really beautiful piano music, and maybe strings.
That's not at all what I was
That's what you do.
Completely different
You give
yeah,
something
sure.
away, and
Yeah, it can be anything.
that is that.
Did you manage to speak to your sister that likes the Kardashians and Star Trek, and you wanted to relate to her, and
Yeah.
did it work?
Yeah, she loves my poems, and she's really strange because she would quote me while watching, watching reality TV. So yeah, she's my number one sort of critic. If she likes it, I know it's good.
If she likes it, it's okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, she'll just roll her eyes and say boring, and then I know I'm not. Yeah, it's not on the right track.
So you have to make sure she doesn't say that too often. You find out what bores her most?
Usually if I get too intense, yeah, then she says it's a bit. So she's a good judge of me, because she knows me well.
I have a friend like that. She has no education at all, and she's older than me. And I remember my last novel, In Wonderland. I had a title, and I was at a dinner party with all these famous writers. Geert Mak, Annette van der Zijl, Frank Westerman, and they were all saying that is not a good title. Joris Luijendijk, all these famous people. That's not a good title for the book, and it was about that a couple that has been threatened, has been accused of terrorism. And then I thought the next day I couldn't sleep all night because I had. God, they're saying that, so they must be right. And then I talked to my friend, and she said, "Well, what's the book about?" And I said, "Well, it's about a woman. Then suddenly the police comes to the house, and her husband's taken away, and they accused of terrorism." She said, "Well, that is In Wonderland, a very good title." And then I thought, well, you're right, and I just left it.
Always listen to people outside of literature.
Yes, and listen to people who read carefully, who understand what you're doing, the heart of it, and I think that's well. It's honesty. But today is hard because the selling of books becomes more and more an issue. So we have to think about that too. But
is there more poetry to read? It probably is.
Yeah.
From Santekamp. In Dutch or English or?
In Dutch, Afrikaans Dutch.
Yeah, okay. Is that okay? Then afterwards we read one in English.
Opa Thomas Daniel Granville. Het is vandaag my opa Thomas se verjaarsdag. Dit sou gewees het. Hy is dood toe ek in matriek was. Dit is al wat ek regtig van matriek kan onthou. Die oggend toe die telefoon lui, het my ma nie kom sê nie. Sy en my pa het opgestaan en is weg hospitaal toe. Al die groot mense, my opa se kinders en hulle mans en vroue is hospitaal toe. Ek wil saamgaan. Ek wil net my opa beloof dat ek okay sou wees, dat ek eendag 'n boek gaan skryf en hom nooit sal vergeet nie, en dat ek die liefste vir hom was. My ma het 'n paar uur later gebel om te sê dat ek vir my en my suster moet kos maak. Sy het niks gesê van my opa nie. Haar woorde het soos vleermuise om my gevlieg. Ek het gewag vir iets. Vir papa is dood, of dit is verby, of hy is oorlede. Maar sy het aanhou praat oor kos. Toe ek uiteindelik stop en vra, het die vleermuise aanhou vlieg. Ja, vroeg vanoggend. Die swaarste vir my was nie dat my opa dood was nie, maar dat die aarde aanhou draai het, dat ek aanhou leef het, dat alles wat verkeerd was, nog steeds verkeerd is, dat ek kon slaap en wakker word, matriekslaag en aan 'n toekoms dink. Die ergste van alles was, dat ek alles kon doen wat ek moes doen, en al wat ek regtig wou doen, was om te huil. Ek wou daaraan huil. Ek wou sy leeftyd uithuil. Ek wou huil vir wie hy was en vir wie hy kon wees. Ek wou huil oor die onregverdigheid en ek wou huil omdat hy regtig lief was vir my en omdat ek geweet het dat hy lief was vir my.
Vandaag is mijn opa Thomas jarig. Dat zou het geval zijn geweest. Hij stierf in het jaar van mijn eindexamen. Dat is het enige wat ik echt van mijn eindexamenjaar onthoud. Toen die ochtend de telefoon ging, kwam mijn moeder niet naar me toe. Zij en mijn vader stonden op en gingen naar het ziekenhuis. Alle grote mensen, de kinderen van mijn opa en hun mannen en vrouwen gingen naar het ziekenhuis. Ik wou mee. Ik wou mijn opa alleen maar beloven dat ik me wel zou redden. Dat ik op een dag een boek zou schrijven en hem nooit zou vergeten en dat ik het meeste van hem hield. Mijn moeder heeft een paar uur later gebeld om te zeggen dat ik moest koken voor mij en mijn zus. Ze heeft niets over mijn opa gezegd. Haar woorden fladderden als vleermuizen om me heen. Ik wachtte op iets. Op papa is dood, of het is voorbij, of hij is overleden. Maar ze bleef maar zeuren over het eten. Toen ik haar uiteindelijk onderbrak, bleven de vleermuizen vliegen. Ja, vanochtend vroeg. Het zwaarste was niet dat mijn opa dood was, maar dat de aarde bleef draaien, dat ik doorleefde, dat alles wat verkeerd was nog steeds verkeerd is. Dat ik kon slapen en wakker worden, mijn eindexamen kon halen en denken aan een toekomst. Het ergste van alles was dat ik alles kon doen wat ik moest doen. En het enige wat ik echt wilde was huilen. Ik wilde dagenlang huilen. Ik wilde zijn jaren uit me huilen. Ik wilde huilen om wie hij was en om wie hij kon zijn. Ik wilde huilen om de onrechtvaardigheid. En ik wilde huilen omdat hij echt van mij hield. En omdat ik heb geweten dat hij van me hield.
One more, yeah, please.
Sure. Jy was klein het jy gesê, jy kan seriously nie die details onthou nie. Verskillende mense onthou verskillende weergawes van dieselfde stories. Jou pa het ingestap gekom iewers, jou ma in 'n arm gegryp, teen die muur gedruk, geklap met die agterkant van sy hand. Jy is nie seker watter hand dit was nie. Jy onthou elke keer uit verskillende rigtings. Jy onthou die klap omdat jou pa se naam ook Sean was en jou ma het Sean geskreeu. Jy wou opspring om te gaan help, maar was nie seker wat Sean sy na gevra het nie.
Je was klein, zei je. Je zweert dat je de details niet meer weet. Verschillende mensen herinneren zich verschillende versies van hetzelfde verhaal. Je vader liep naar binnen, greep ergens de arm van je moeder, drukte haar tegen de muur en sloeg haar met de achterkant van zijn hand. Je weet niet zeker welke hand. Het was. Je herinnert je het elke keer uit een andere hoek. Je herinnert je de klap omdat je vader ook Sean heette en je moeder Sean schreeuwde. Je wilde opspringen om te helpen, maar wist niet zeker welke Sean ze bedoelde.
Mense sê druggies kan hulle self help as hulle wou. Mense sê die probleem is die drugs. Maar my vriend Sean glo niks meer wat mense sê nie. Hy sê as iemand eendag na hom toe kom en vir hom vertel hoe dit voel, om 6 jaar oud te wees en onder die Subway op Wynbergstasie te slaap, sal hy maybe luister. Sean sê, as iemand vir hom kon vertel van hoe dit voel, hoe hulle voor Kentucky geleen slaap het, net om kinder naby kos te wees, sal hy moontlik luister. Sean is fucking slim vir iemand wat net 5 jaar skool gegaan het. Hy weet alles van alles af. Hy het eendag vir my recite. Like the park birds, he came early. Like the water, he sat down. Nou daai is mos poetry, het hy altyd gesê. Sean is opgesluit vir een van die drug-related charge. Kort voor sy release het hy vir my 'n brief gestuur om te sê wanneer hy uitkom. En hoe maybe hy nou gereed is om iets different te try. Die tronk is nie 'n plek vir 'n mens nie, was die laaste reël in sy brief. 'n Dag voor Sean se vrylating is hy vermoor. Mense sê dit was gang-related, dwelms, sy tyd, maar ek glo nie meer wat mense sê nie.
Mensen zeggen, junkies kunnen zichzelf helpen, als ze zouden willen. Mensen zeggen, die drugs zijn het probleem. Maar mijn vriend Sean gelooft niets meer van wat de mensen zeggen. Hij zegt, als iemand op een dag naar hem toe komt en hem vertelt hoe het voelt om 6 jaar oud te wezen en onder een brug bij het station van Wijnberg te slapen, dan luistert hij misschien. Sean zegt, als iemand hem komt vertellen over hoe ze voor de ingang van de Kentucky Fried Chicken lagen te slapen om alleen maar soort van in de buurt van eten te wezen, dan luistert hij misschien. Sean is onwijs slim voor iemand die maar 5 jaar op school heeft gezeten. Hij weet echt alles van alles. Op een dag heeft hij iets voor mij opgezegd. Like the park birds, he came early. Like the water, he sat down. Kijk, dat is nog eens poetry, zei hij altijd. Sean werd opgesloten vanwege iets met drugs. Vlak voor hij werd vrijgelaten heeft hij me een brief gestuurd om te zeggen wanneer hij vrij zou komen. En dat hij er nu wie weet klaar voor is om iets anders te proberen. De gevangenis is geen plek voor een gewone jongen, was de laatste regel van zijn brief. Op de dag voor zijn vrijlating is Sean vermoord. Mensen zeggen het had te maken met bendes, drugs, zijn tijd die op was, maar ik geloof niet meer wat de mensen zeggen. Now we owe him an English pun. Oké.
Bipolar honey. Ik wens ik kon opstaan soos gister. Gaan was, aantrek, gaan werk soos gister. Maar vandag is 'n ander gister. Vandag is alles wat mooi is, lelijk. En alles wat lelijk is, ek. Miskien is môre beter, as ek net deur die gevaar van vandag kan kom.
I wish I could get up like yesterday, wash, get dressed, go to work like yesterday. But today is a different day. Today everything I know is lost, and everything which is lost is me. Maybe tomorrow will be better, if I can only get through the danger of today. The housewife?
Die huisvrou. En Doris was 'n tipiese tannie. Soggens het sy haar kinders by die skool kom afsien met 'n pink check overall en groen rollers in haar hare. Sy het heel dag huis skoongemaak, wasgoed gewas en kos gekook. Sy was 'n huisvrou. Eendag in juni het dit vreeslik gereën, maar die Doris het wasgoed opgehang, vensters gewas en haar stoepplante water gegee. Later het die polisievan en 2 van Tygerberg se lijkhuisbussies voor haar huis gestop. 3 bodybags is op stretchers uitgestoot. 1 groot en 2 kleintjies. Auntie Doris het vir die eerste keer in jare 'n blomrok aangehad, met haar hare wat in lang los krulle oor haar skouers hang. Sy is gehandcuff en is agter in die polisievan. Sy het vir ons nosy bystanders gesê dat ons maar kan kyk. Haar huis is nou skoon.
Auntie Doris was a typical housewife in my neighborhood. Every morning she dropped her kids off at school, dressed in a pink check overall and big green rollers in her hair. She cooked and cleaned and did her laundry. She was a housewife. One rainy day in June, Auntie Doris did her regular house cleaning. She washed clothes, the windows and watered the plants. Later that morning, a police van and 2 Tygerberg mortuary vans pulled up in front of her house. 3 bodybugs were pushed out, 1 big and 2 small ones. For the first time in years, Auntie Doris had a floral dress with her hair in luscious curls down her back. She was handcuffed and climbed into a police van. She turned around, looked at us in the crowd, and said that we can look all we want. Her house is clean.
Thank you very much. Maybe it's a good idea now to go to the audience, if there are any questions in the audience, to ask to either Christine Otto or another Kamfer. Not all at once, please. You want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Minor. I'm a student. So my question is to both of you, since you are established writers. And my question is this: how did you start to write, and how did you know this is what I want to write? Because I have this so many things in my mind, but I don't know where to start. So how did you decide that this is what I want to write? And because I think if you're a writer, then you have so many things, but if you're not established and you are young and you really don't know where to start. So my question would be to any one of you how did you start to write?
Shall I answer that? Well, I always wanted to be a writer, I think, but at some point I didn't know any writers in my, so it didn't seem to be like a career. So not until I became a journalist I could see, oh, maybe I could be a writer. But I remember very clearly the moment of change. I used to write everything down and all these ideas but I wasn't focused. And then I entered like a writing group, and there was this very liberal teacher. She said, "What is the story that's on your mind? What is the story you want to tell?" And in just so many words, I wrote it down. I want a story, this. And that was the moment that I started to write my first novel. 5 years later there was. So that was my story. But I think it's only just to write down what you want to say. What's in there, write it down. And don't bother about form or structure, just write it down. And then at some point you'll notice, maybe this is a voice, or I don't know if you want to write poetry or prose, that's differently, but
stories and stuff.
Yeah, so it's and find a tutor, find a mentor that can be so helpful. It's someone you trust and someone who reads your work and criticize you for helping you, not for burning you down. I think that can be great help if you have someone that you really trust, and not ask everybody to read it.
I think for me personally, when I started, I also didn't know anyone who wrote and didn't read much. I just liked writing, and for me, I decided that to stick to what I knew. I think starting out, to build confidence, you just kind of stick to what you know, stick to the stories that you feel confident about, and write about things you know about. And so that makes it easier on the language, and it makes it easier on the story. So you are the authority on your own story, so no one can really criticize it. So as you get, you build your career and you start writing more, I think then you can explore and challenge yourself. But for a writer who's just starting out, just sort of start very small, stick to what you know, and write honestly, respect your craft, respect what you're writing, and take it really seriously, but not too seriously. It's not life, it's writing, and always be clear about that.
That's why so many first novels and so many first book of poetry are about people's own families, and that has a reason. And usually those books that they can be so good because the first book of a really good writer is a book, very important book. So don't think, oh, I shouldn't write about my own story. It's not interesting, because the more personal and the more private you get, the more universal it gets. And anything can be interesting.
Thank you. More questions?
I have one question.
You have a question?
Yes.
Really?
I was wondering, Ronelda, you are now staying in Amsterdam for quite a while. You're busy with lectures and performances. I have actually two questions. Does your stay in Holland, because you also intend to write here, right? To work with your husband on a new novel. Does it influence you in your writing, the fact that you're staying in Amsterdam? And secondly, I'm very curious to basically your new writings, what it will be about.
It does influence me, but I tend to be very strict about when I write. So I kind of stick to the theme or stick to whatever I'm working on. So it's not, I'm in Amsterdam now, I have to write about Amsterdam. I know I'm working on a story, so that's what the focus is. And the outside environment doesn't change because the story is inside and it's, being written, it's personal. And the book that we're working on now is a graphic novel, and it's based on the characters in the second book, in Santegram, and it's actually, the characters in the book are all adult characters in Santegram, but in the Ekestissia is the title, in the graphic novel they're all children, and it's partly based on my own experience as growing up, because I grew up very sheltered from the reality of South Africa, and I feel like my first few years I didn't know anything, and it's just sort of remembering your childhood without the politics, because the adults in this book they remember the horrible things that happened, and so the younger characters will remember what the place was like, and not the politics, not the forced removals, just their lives.
It's on purpose that you write from their perspective in order to avoid the difficult political part of it.
To show that people's lives weren't just politics. It was they had lives as well. Life went on. Meanwhile.
Thank you.
If there aren't any more questions, oh, there's one question in the back over there. The microphone is heading your way.
Hello, I'm Tom Thomas, I'm a philosopher. I want to ask a question about, during the dialogue, there was a moment when, I think it was Christine who said that I write mostly to make what was unbearable for me more bearable. During the process of writing, things somehow fit or become understandable. That's also a specific perspective, I think, on writing. I can also imagine that writing itself makes what was bearable almost unbearable when you read it. For instance, a story of Kafka, of something which is very, let's say, well, very normal, almost unremarkable, almost becomes in the, let's say, in the space of literature itself, something hardly to be bearable. So I wanted to ask, is your perspective on writing this for as that it is somehow a cure, a therapy?
No, not at all. No, no. I have done a lot of therapy. Don't to stay normal in the past. No, not the least. But I think, yeah, I was just trying to explain. God, I don't have an answer. Maybe I don't have an answer. That could be. No, it's just interesting what I'm. It's. The thing with this book for me personally is just like I'm writing it in the book. The book writes itself in a book, and it's like a search. And it's not therapy, but it is interesting, and it's. But maybe that's too personal for me to talk about almost. Because I can't answer that, but. I usually
about, but is it also too personal to write about?
Sorry?
Is it also too personal to write about?
Too personal to write about? No, it isn't, because I think that's the art. That's where art comes in, because I think it's a story worthwhile telling. It's not only the story of my father and my mother, my ancestors, and the whole social context in which they grew up, which is interesting and all, because in my whole family it's the rise and decay of socialism almost. That is interesting because what's happening now to society. This is in that, but it's also I'm terribly interested in in the matter of identity, what that is, or what we think it is, or maybe it's just an invention. And because of my personal history, which again I know best, and so well, I'm 50 now, so I can talk about it. I can write about it now. This is what I'm exploring in the book, trying to find what is that identity, because for a long. I'm talking now about myself and the book. This is difficult. I had this difficulty finding what it is, who I am. What is that? What is it? You know, that whole. It's the difficulty of being someone. You are someone, but what is it? So, but.
You're still in the process of.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about, but maybe you understand what I'm saying. I probably.
Do you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's
no, but I was quoting Adriaan van Dis, who said, anything is bearable as long as you can put it in a story. We tell stories to make things bearable and to share.
No, actually, stop. Do we tell stories to make things bearable?
No, we don't tell them, but to experience our humanness. And even when the stories are unbearable, we want to read them. We want to read Kafka because it touches us and we recognize something. And even if that's dark and horrible, because we are dark and horrible sometimes inside, and we have to know that. We want to read that. And it's private to read it, so it's safe. I don't have to smash your face. I can read about it. You know, that's the thing. That's what I want to say.
Okay. So may I link this to may I link this to, let's say, the things when Ronelda said, well, for me, Afrikaans is just a normal language.
Yeah, because you don't really know the context, you don't know the culture, you don't know the history. Then it would be just a normal language. But if you, if you knew South Africa, if you knew its story, if you knew its people, then you would. That's why some people, the people who know the story, immediately recognize how difficult it must be for me to write in Afrikaans. So if you don't know, then I think it's just a language. You treat it as everything in every other language. But yeah, well, that's a good thing that you know you don't if you don't know it, it's a good thing. But I think it's better to know the story of the country, and then you understand it more, and you understand the poetry even more once you know the history.
The beautiful thing about this book is that it's, in short, almost a history of colored people in South Africa, because you know the difference between the coloreds and blacks.
This question
No, I
from
don't
you.
think
You don't know. Well, colored people were set aside by the apartheid regime.
Yeah, I
huh?
think
Or maybe
everyone was set aside by the apartheid regime.
but apart from blacks.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, colored black people in South Africa, in the South African context, would be the tribal people, the people who lived in the northern side of the country, of South Africa, and they would be the Xhosas, the Zulus, they would be sort of the warrior tribes of the land of South Africa. And the colored people would be a mixture between the slaves that the Dutch colonizers brought with them to work, and also the indigenous people who lived on the western side of South Africa, the Khoisan people. So coloreds would be mixed, would be their ancestry would be descendants of slaves and of other sort of all the other races that mixed and sort of settled at the Cape. So that's the history that's the difference between colored and black.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's okay to say colored
Yeah.
in the South African context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe it's we can conclude with your second part of your book.
Yeah, but I was also thinking about the English. Maybe I should read something.
Read something in English.
Yeah,
if you like.
It's not nice for him to. But it's the beginning of this book. It's not from my new novel, but from the last poets, the laatste dichters. Shall I do it in English? I think it's more fair to him. Huh?
You're getting a special
But
treatment
it's
tonight.
yeah, but it's difficult because I'm not used to reading in English. So it's the beginning of that book. So I'll just try. Just excuse me. And it's not my own translation, but it's the beginning. But it's too long, so I will read parts from that. And maybe I should tell something about that book, because it's a portrait of a group of revolutionary poets from the 60s. So the last poets, they were they were very famous all over the world. Also in South Africa, they were famous. Even there, they were inspired by really. I can't do the click. Kortetsile. He's a South African poet, and he was the advisor of the Minister of Culture. And they got their name through a poem by the South African poet. So, the book is basically described their lives from 5-year-old till now. And it's, they came from really difficult backgrounds and histories of abuse and racism and self-hate. And because they made this militant poetry, beautiful poetry, they elevated themselves. But at the same time, the ugliness was inside them. And as the black movement was in a downfall, also by the political context, in the 70s, each of them, they went into drugs or alcohol, or they left their children. They actually had no father figures, so that was the problem. So they didn't know how to be fathers and husbands. The book starts in 1979 when Umar bin Hassan, who is the main character is going to freebase for the first time, which is crack smoking, and that is his downfall. And he's consciously knowing, because he has his first play out. He was this successful revolutionary poet. He has this play out, and the New York Times is writing about it, but he loses it, and that's the downfall of the black movement too. It was the backlash came later. So I read just a few fragments from that. Fall. He remembered the exact date, November 13, 1979. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. He was in Emidia's apartment, a chic 8th-floor apartment on Columbus Avenue. He looked outside. It rained softly. He looked at the drops on the window, meandering slowly down the glass. Outside, the streetlights were already lit. He saw the trees in Central Park, exuberantly drabbled hues of yellow and green and red and auburn. There were moist, thin clouds above, the pale orange-yellow sunlight trying to burst through. Even now, almost 20 years later, he remembered every detail of the dreary view, as if it had all stood still, the shimmering reflection of his face in the glass. On the street down below, the headlines of cars and taxis melted into an elongated, flickering image, a fading light flash nestling into his retina. Never before he had seen New York like this, an abstract painting frozen under his gaze, the city being a perfect reflection of his state of mind. He was calm, his head was clear, almost lucid. He heard the idle buzz of the heater. It was as if he had worked towards this moment his whole life, as if everything he had ever experienced, all the violence, the turmoil, the love, the sex, the disappointment, the success, oozed out of him, leaving him empty. That was how he felt, as if he was ready to fall down, deep down. Emidia was gone. She had told him that she would be in Harlem on business and that he should wait for her. She would be late. The burning, bitter smell of cooked cocaine entered the living room from the kitchen. Zaid sat in the kitchen. Zaid was a prominent preacher of the Nation of Islam. He was constantly around Emidia. "Come on, Brother Umar, you gotta try this. This is the next step," he had said with his whispering, conspiratorial voice of his. "This goes much further than snorting. This is heaven on earth." Zaid had never said it in Emidia's presence. Emidia had forbidden Umar to smoke the stuff. As long as he did not smoke, he could get as much shit from her as he wanted. "Then I'm finished," she said. "Then I throw you out." He was sober that afternoon. He had showered and shaved and worn one of the white silk shirts that Emidia had bought for him at some place on 125th Street. Emidia bought everything for him. Brooks Brothers suits, fedora hat, shoes, all in exchange for cocaine. And he gave her sex. Well, then we just part of it. And then, poets and priests have a lot in common, don't you think so? Zaid laughed. His eyes were closed, a heavenly smile on his face. Both searching for inspiration, right? Get out of here, man. How do you know that? Have you gone crazy? Have they gone crazy at the Nation? Aren't they onto you? The first time it's like coming, Zaid said. But then with your whole being, like a supernatural orgasm. No pussy can beat that. I know. You don't know nothing, man. Come in the kitchen, Umar. What the hell else are you doing here? You're just like me, too proud to give in just like that. But I see what's burning you up, man. A little excitement and a quickie isn't good enough for you. No woman can give you what you're looking for. Nobody. I told you, poets and priests are alike. Sometimes it seems that he was imprisoned by his own poems. A Michigan University professor had sent him a letter. If he could enter Niggers Are Scared of Revolution in a reader for the students. He was teaching a course on poetry and the black nationalist movement of the 60s. The poem was a classic, the man wrote. It bared the core of the problem that black men, had been struggling with for years. Niggers are lovers. Niggers love to hear Malcolm rap, but they didn't love Malcolm. Niggers love anything but themselves. He didn't write back. As long as no new poems came, he didn't have the courage to say anything about his work, like he had no right. He could hardly listen to music anymore. One night, when Malika, his wife, put on Birth of the Cool from Miles Davis, he had turned off the turntable. It hurt to hear those familiar sounds, the subtle turns and repetitions, the warm, hazy whisper of the trumpet, the endless search for the right tone. Miles was a weird guy, a glamour boy, but his music cut right through his soul. Behind every tone a word was hidden, a mood, a vibe. But that night he saw nothing, no images, no words, like the music was blinding him and deafening him simultaneously. He hardly could remember what he himself sounded like, as if his poems did not need him anymore. They had a life of their own, separate from him. He saw them when he hurried through the busy streets of Manhattan and would see all those anonymous faces go by, the lights, the screaming neon lights, the high blinking towers, the beggars, the hustling, the junkies, the whirlwind of words and images and sounds that conjured up feelings of homesickness. Zaid turned to the other side, clicked with his tongue. "Get up, man. Amidia will be in any minute." Uma pushed him back. Zaid growled and opened his eyes. "What?" "Amidia doesn't like shit happening, and definitely not your stinking feet on her couch." Zaid laughed. He pushed himself off the couch and disappeared into the kitchen. Uma watched him leave. He knew he had fooled himself. All along he knew that sooner or later he would be smoking that stuff. He had no choice. He had simply waited for the right moment. He walked to the kitchen. The light blinded him for a moment. "Sit down," Zaid said. He gawked at the flame of his lighter that cooked the coke on the spoon. "Get the pipe." Uma picked up the stone pipe from the table. Zaid poured the boiling stuff in the pipe. "Quick," he said, "before it's gone. You gotta keep it in as long as possible." Uma inhaled the bittersweet smoke. He felt the smoke burn his windpipe, his lungs. "Do you feel it?" Zaid's voice echoed in his head. He shut his eyes. It was as if the warmth going through his body pushed him back, a soft fluid warmth. His cheeks burned. He felt fizzling vibes in his head, like waking up after a long deep sleep. There was only red. He saw red velvet. He wanted to lie down, got up and went over to the couch. He saw the fish glide through the molasses water, the blue-yellow light of the aquarium. The light was bright and sharp and real. He lay down. His fingers tingled, his legs were heavy. The heat hugged him, caressed him, kissed him, like falling into a memory. "This is only the beginning," he heard Zaid say in the distance. He couldn't speak. His longing melted with the velvety soft storm raging through his body. He smiled. "It's going to be all right, brother Uma," Zaid whispered. "All right."
Thank you, Christine Otten, for reading the first part of The Last Poets.
Jeroen?
And thank you.
I have a very tiny question here that can only be answered with yes or no, and it's a question for Ronelda.
Okay.
Hi Ronelda, mag ek in Afrikaans praat vanaand?
Natuurlijk.
Hi. Ek wil jou net een ding vra. Ek weet daar het baie lelike dinge gebeur in ons land en ek weet daar het ook baie goeie dinge gebeur in ons land. Ek het net een vraag vir jou en dit is eintlik net 'n ja of 'n nee antwoord. Is jy nog lief vir ons land soos wat hy nou is?
Natuurlijk, ja.
Dankie.
What did she ask?
Oh, she wanted to know if I still loved our country, and of course, I mean, I wouldn't be writing the stories, writing about the people of the country. I didn't love it. It's part of me. It's part of who I am. It's my history.
You should read this one, the Santakam. It's just full of love. It's just very, very beautiful. It's just full of love of the country.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Christine Otten and Ronelda Kamfer. At this Writers Unlimited night, if you want to know what we're going to do next, visit our website, writersunlimited.nl it is, I believe.
Correct, and we still have books there.
Books
Yes.
at the back, so you can buy the books you want to buy here. Thank you very much for being here tonight.